Good afternoon, all. I am Tapas, Associate Fellow at the Foundation for Agrarian Studies. And on behalf of the Foundation, I welcome you all to the 6th seminar of FAS Young Scholar Online Seminar Series. At the outset, I thank Rosa, Luxemburg, Stiftung, Satheesha for their continuous support in the running this seminar series. As you all know that the seminar series covers a range of topics, including agricultural production, agrarian and labor relations, rural economy, caste in rural India, the questions of women's work in rural India, and science and technology in agriculture. Today is the 6th seminar of the series, and our speaker is B. Satheesha. He is a PhD scholar at Indian Institute of Technology, Delhi. Today, he will be speaking about his work on rural employment diversification in India with evidence from the resurvey of a village in southern Karnataka. In view of today's seminar, I will take this opportunity to again discuss the possibilities of research collaboration between the young scholars who are interested in the various aspects of rural economies and within the foundation. As you all know, that I have been highlighting this point in all these seminars. And I must say that Satheesha's doctoral work is one such example. He has used the FAS baseline survey data and method of village studies for research work. He spent 2 to 3 months at FAS with us as an intern to understand the research problems, the method of village studies, the survey questionnaires, and use the baseline data which is collected by the foundation. And I must say this collaboration has been continuing in various ways through this channel. In the similar manner, a number of research scholars have developed their MPhil and doctoral research on various aspects of the rural economy in India using this foundation's large database. And then I again say that FAS invites scholars and students who are interested in the field of rural economy in India. The foundation has data on various aspects of socioeconomic conditions from 27 villages across 12 states of India. In this series, we are most fortunate that Professor Barbara Harris-White, Emeritus Professor of Development Studies at the University of Oxford, is chairing all this seminar, and her expertise and insightful comments have been instrumental in enriching this seminar series in many ways. In today's seminar, I welcome Dr. Rajshree Bedamatta, Professor at the Institute of Technology Guwahati, who will act as a discussant in today's seminar. I thank you, Professor Rajshree. Now, without taking much time, I welcome the chair to initiate and moderate the proceeding. In the interest of time, I request the attendees to key in their comments and questions in the Zoom chat box. They will be taken up in the interactive session that will follow up the presentation. Thank you. Professor Barbara, please.
Thank you, Tapas. Can you hear me?
Yes, Professor.
Good. Good evening, good morning, wherever you are, everybody. It's a pleasure to chair this seminar series. It's a really great pleasure. So all I want to do after that fulsome introduction is to repeat what I've said in previous sessions, that the speaker, Dr. Satheesha, is very welcome to use about 25 minutes to lay out his presentation, and Dr. Rajshree Bedamatta will take between 5 and 10 minutes to discuss it. The rest of the time is open for Q&A. I will make some comments, and it may lap over the hour slightly. Anybody who has to leave on the hour is very welcome to do so, but we may stray a little bit over time. Okay, without more ado, may I ask Dr. Satheesha to present this very interesting, to talk to this very interesting title, Rural Employment Diversification, and to make the link with village studies. Over to you.
I'll share the screen. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to present my work in Young Scholar Seminar of FAS. My work mainly try to look at the main factors which determine the rural employment diversification in India by using the evidence obtained from the village resurvey conducted in southern Karnataka. So according to Arthur Lewis, the structure transformation is the engine of development. That is, shift of workers from low productive agriculture sector to high productive industry. But this type of structure transformation is much delayed in India. According to the secondary data sources, agriculture sectors continue to employ roughly 60% of the rural workforce in 2017-18. If you look at the table, you can understand, particularly after 2004-5, there is a marked shift of workforce away from agriculture. Between 4-5 to 11-12, both share as well as absolute number of workers in agriculture declined at a faster rate. But after 11-12, this diversification has slowed down. So literature identifies number of factors for the labor market changes in the recent period, which includes expansion of non-farm sector, then urbanization, migration, and other reasons. But this process of diversification varies across regions and states in India. For instance, between 11-12 to 17-18, some of the Indian states registered an absolute rise in agriculture workers, say states like Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh. So given this broad background, this study attempt to understand this rural labor market movements in deeper, with main focus on how caste-based social structures and the nature of agrarian structure determines the rural employment diversification. The study uses the primary survey data collected from village called Alabujanahalli, which located in the southern Karnataka. So the main motivation to choose Karnataka for my survey first was compared to other southern Indian states, the proportional workforce in agriculture is very high in Karnataka. Around 7 to 70% of the rural workforce engaged in agriculture. Second, compared to again other southern states, the productivity, agriculture productivity as well as rural wages are very low in Karnataka. Coming to the village, the 2009 round survey was conducted by Foundation for Agrarian Studies. It was a census survey and they covered 243 households. In fact, in Karnataka, FAS conducted village surveys in 3 villages. One is Alabujanahalli, then Sirisandra and Zapu. The main motivation for me to select Alabujanahalli for my surveys is proximity to semi-urban towns and the metropolitan city of Bangalore. And I did the resurvey in 2018-19. As I mentioned, this village is very close to the Mandya town and also the metropolitan city of Bangalore. And more importantly, it's well connected by road and rail network. When coming to village, the Vokkaliga is the main dominant caste in the village. They account for 77% of the total population. And also they own more than 90% of the all land in Alabujanahalli. And another important caste group is Adi Karnataka or SC. They comprise around 11% of the total population. The village is largely agrarian. Around 95% of the cultivated area is under irrigation, and the village receives water from canals linked to the Kaveri river. And the main crops grown in the village are sugarcane, paddy, and ragi. Now I'll briefly explain some of the main socioeconomic features of village. This table shows the distribution of household in different size classes of operation holding. What we can see is that the degree of landlessness is very low in this village. It's only 18.6% of the household did not operate any land in 2018. This figure is low, very low compared to the state average. Karnataka, it's around 35%. But clearly we can see there is a strong class and caste nexus. Among Vokkaligas, only 6.8% of the household did not operate any land. And more importantly, they operated 3.2 acres of land, mostly irrigated land in 2089. If you compare any communities, they operated less than 1 acre land. Another major feature is the dominance of agriculture and allied activities for a long period. According to the census data, proportion of agriculture workers in total workforce was nearly 90% for almost 4 decades, starting from 1971. But in the recent survey shows a strong signals of diversification of employment towards non-farm sector. So the question arises, what are the main factors responsible for these changes? So in this study, I'm trying to provide some of the explanation for these changes. If you look at the occupation structure, we can see self-employment is the dominant source of employment, particularly for male. In 2018-19, more than 50% of them are engaged in self-employment in agriculture. For female, both self-employed as well as casual labor in agriculture are important source of employment. When coming to non-agricultural employment, we can see between 2009 and 19, there's a large increase in the share of regular wage salary. It's almost double for both male and female. So here, regular wage salary, I mean, if a worker receives earnings on monthly basis, then I classify them as regular wage salary. So if you look at the occupation structure between caste groups like Vokkaliga and SC, we can see the agriculture continues to dominate the employment. For Vokkaliga, it's mostly self-employed in agriculture, whereas for SC, it's largely casual labor in agriculture. Please also note that between 2009 and 19, there has been a large decline in self-employment in agriculture. It's true for both Vokkaliga and SC. Let's come to the, why the agriculture continue to dominate the employment of Alabujanahalli, despite its proximity to semi-urban towns and metropolitan city of Bangalore. One factor could be its agrarian structure. So the Mysore state, so Mandya was a part of Mysore state before. So the Mysore state was under right-to-water land tenure system during the British period. Under this, the occupant get the title of land directly. So that could be why the land tenure system in Alabujanahalli is more dominated by owner cultivation. Second could be the better implementation of land reform. So within Karnataka, compared to northern region, the land reform was successful in the southern region. And this might have contributed to the lower incidence of tenancy and better distribution of land. So these factors played an important role in determining the occupation structure of the village. We have seen that cultivators is the dominant in this village. And second is the expansion of irrigation, particularly after the construction of Krishnarajasagara Dam across Kaveri River in 1930s. So this extension of irrigation had it's totally changed the agrarian landscape of Mandya region. First, it changed the cropping pattern from subsistence crops like jowar or finger millets to high yielding and labor intensive crops of sugarcane, followed by paddy. So in this figure, we can see the sugarcane accounted for 52% of the total gross total cropped area in 2018-19, followed by paddy. Another main impact is on Mandya. So the extension of irrigation and cultivation of sugarcane actually contributed to the growth of Mandya as a major town in Karnataka. So the first sugarcane factory was established in 1933 in Mandya. Then Mandya became a separate district 1939 with Mandya as the district headquarters, which gave big boost to the investment in infrastructure, in particular better road networks. And also Mandya has a well developed markets for sericulture and dairy. So the census handbook of Mandya and the studies by Epstein well documented how the extension of irrigation as well as the cultivation of sugarcane changed or contributed to the growth of Mandya. The village Alabujanahalli also closely integrated with this regional economy of Mandya, which provided supplementary sources of income and mitigate risks in agriculture. Most importantly, sericulture and dairying is an important source of supplementary income for marginal and small farmers. Whereas for rich farmers, they derived huge rental incomes from the townships and houses they own in the nearby town, mainly in KM Doddi. Third factor could be the farmers, various forms of control over labor by the farmers. During my survey, also, I found 2 cases of attached labor. So both of them belong to the community called Tigla. They are landless. And one of them said that 6 years back, he borrowed 1 lakh rupees from the rich farmers in the village. Since then, he has been working in his land. And employee pays the existing wage rate, 300 rupees per day, but deducts 100 rupees from his wage as interest. And he want to look for better jobs in Bangalore, but employers is not allowing him to move out of the village until he pays the amount. And he said that there are many people like me in this village, but they are not revealing. So attached labor can also lower the chance of diversification. Another important factor could be lack of non-farm employment opportunities, in particular Manrega. So we know that in rural India, Manrega is an important source of non-farm employment, particularly for female. But the experience in Alabujanahalli, the implementation of Manrega has been poor. In 2008-9 survey, on an average, a household received only 31 days of employment during the year. It's strikingly lower than the 100 days guaranteed employment under Manrega. And the situation hasn't changed much in my resurvey also. So during my survey, I also met the village mate. He's the supervisor or responsible person to implement the Manrega in the village. So according to him, there are mainly 3 hurdles in implementing Manrega in the village. First one, he said the control of Vakaligas over GP. So they successfully able to lobby the politicians not to implement Manrega, particularly during the peak seasons of agriculture. That's the one. Second thing, he said many of the works allocated for the private contracts instead of it could have allocated under Manrega. And third reason is non-availability of common land, especially to undertake the public works. As I mentioned, more than 90% of the land is owned by Vakaliga. And he said that there are a lot of private works under Manrega is happening in Vakaliga's land. But what they do is they use machines instead of labor. So these are the reasons why the implementation of Manrega is poor. And this might in turn might have contributed to the lower wage levels in the village, especially for female. The average daily wage rate was only 131 rupees in 2018-19. And if you look at Manrega wages, it's around 270 to 280 rupees. But as I mentioned, the recent survey shows the strong signals of diversification. And if you look at the nature of diversification, is quite different from the trend observed at national level and other village studies. One important factor is the high share of regular employment. Around 23% of them are regularly employed. Whereas if you look at well-studied village of Palampur, where the diversification towards non-farm sector largely driven by the casual employment, mainly construction. Another aspect is like high share of SC in regular employment. In 2018-19, around 33% of the SC workers employed in regular employment is higher than the share of Vakaliga. And who are moving out? It's mostly the younger workforce between 15 to 34. They're the workers who are moving out of agriculture. This is true for both SC and Vakaliga. But if you look at the distribution of workers in various non-farm activities, you can see there is a clear difference between Vakaliga and SC. So for Vakaliga, they succeeded in securing better paying jobs like professionals in education institutions or multinational companies. And also they employed in manufacturing sector. Whereas SCs, the major source of employment for them are sales workers in textile, security guards, or suppliers in restaurant, etc. And these differences also reflected in their earnings. For Vakaligas, a worker on an average receives 20 to 25,000 rupees per month, whereas SC worker receives on an average 10 to 15,000 per month. Let's look at what are the factors which might have contributed to the recent diversification in Alabujanahalli. One could be the expansion of education, in particular higher education. Is true for both Wakaliga and SC. We can see more 30 to 40% of the workers had the education qualification above high secondary and above. Most importantly, you can see large improvement in workers with the graduation level for both Wakaliga and SC. So the expansion of higher education also might have contributed or helped the workers to secure better paying jobs in non-farm sector. Second could be the proximity to towns. If you look at for Wakaliga, the migration is the major form of accessing non-farm employment. Around 47.3% of the employment located in Bangalore. Whereas for SC, also all other communities except Wakaliga, commuting nearby towns is the major form of accessing non-farm employment. So third factor could be the stagnation or decline in agriculture output growth between 2008 and 2009 and 19. The average real gross value output from all crops has either remained same or declined between 2009 and 19. Look at sugarcane. It's the major crop grown in Alabujanahalli. So between 2009 and 19, the real value of output declined marginally. This is despite the fact that the yield of sugarcane as well as the sale prices of sugarcane rose impressively. But the real value declined because the wholesale price index also increased 3 times. So that's the reason why, particularly for sugarcane, the real value of output declined. Although I haven't calculated the net income, but this evidence suggests that the net income for farmer also might have declined during this period. The major problems facing by the cultivators in Alabujanahalli, even in Mandya, one is delay in payment for sugarcane. So the sugarcane is an annual crop which takes almost 12 months to mature. After they harvest and sell it to the factory, they have to wait for 5 to 12 months to get their payment, which means on an average they have to wait 1 to 2 years to get the payment. That's one of the main issue the farmers were complaining. And second one, decline in irrigation water from the canal, especially for the summer crop, paddy. So during the 2018-19 survey, many of the farmers kept the land fallow, especially the land under summer crop, paddy. So all these changes in Alabujanahalli also associated with the rising inequality in asset ownership. So this table shows the share of asset by asset decile. And we can clearly see that decile 10 accounted for 50% of total value of assets in 2009 and is increased to almost 65%. And this is reflected in the Gini coefficient also. And also given the mean value of assets. We can see Wakaliga is able to double their mean value of asset between 2009 and 19. So finally, I'll summarize the main findings of my study. So we have seen that agriculture and allied activities employs high proportion of workforce in Alabujanahalli. And if you look at caste-wide distribution, Wakaligas are more hold on to agriculture, and they are also land-owning class. A number of factors, most importantly, favorable historical conditions such as agrarian structure, then access to irrigation, changes in cropping pattern, and also farmers' control over labor. These all factors might have contributed to the sustenance of agriculture in Alabujanahalli. But we have seen the recent period, there's some signals of diversification towards non-farm sector. Major factor could be expansion of education, then proximity of towns, then deepening agrarian crisis like payment delay, then shortage of water. This all might have contributed to the movement of workers, particularly younger workforce out of agriculture. And also we have seen that Wakaliga is able to secure better paying jobs. And all these changes are also associated with the rising inequality in asset ownership. in Alabujanahalli. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to invite everybody attending the seminar to put their questions in the chat box. And I and other people and the FAS team will bundle them into themes if there are a lot of questions. But now I would like to ask Dr. Rajshree Bedamatta from IIT Guwahati, who's expert in agrarian change and food and nutrition, as well as rural labour, to give her comments. Over to you.
I'm audible.
Yes, you are.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Barbara. I have jotted down a few points, and with your permission, I would like to read them out in the interest of time. Okay, so thank you, Satheesha, for this very short and crisp presentation. This paper is premised on the extant literature that structural transformation in India is stunted. There are constraints in moving to a Lewis path of development, and the constraints seems to have deepened in countries such as India because of an inadequately developed non-farm sector. Satheesha has also shown in the beginning of his presentation that in India, according to the PLFS figures, agriculture and allied activities continue to employ close to 60% of the rural workforce. And an important question that has engaged attention of scholars and policymakers is that have the rest then shifted to non-farm activities or have joined the unemployed labor force or are choosing to be out of the labor force completely? We have evidence that non-farm diversification is stunted and all macro level indicators point to massive open unemployment in India. And we know that the situation among the rural women workforce and labor force is also extremely discouraging. More so, the gender differentials are also severe and intense. Satheesha has also shown that there is a decline in share as well as absolute numbers of employment in agriculture. However, the relative growth in agricultural output and wage rates are faster, with wide gaps in labor absorption and labor productivity. And some of the factors influencing labor market changes have also been highlighted. For example, expansion of the non-farm sector, urbanization, migration, and expansion of social policy and welfare programs. And to these reasons, one may also add more and more persons in the labor force prolonging in education sector, which the village study clearly shows. But what is alarming also is that those in education are not translating into movement to workforce, and that is what the macro level data tells us. So clearly there is a sizable potential labor force that is missing from action in India. Against such a background of structural transformation, this paper studies how caste-based social structures and nature of agrarian structure influences the economic outcomes and broad structural transformation of the economy based on panel data for the study village in Karnataka. And the scholar has delineated some of the important emerging features. I'll highlight some of the features, and within this, I'll also try to pose a few questions if the scholar might want to answer later. One is that the land distribution is, of course, relatively biased in favor of the dominant caste, the Vokkaligas. In terms of land distribution, however, the modal mean is somewhere around the marginal land holding category. Even among the Vokkaligas, the modal average on observation is somewhere between the marginal and small holders. So I have a question on this, that since there is panel data, do we have any information about how land distribution has changed in terms of land transactions between 2019 and 2009 and 19? Or also how the tenancy market has been impacted, giving rise to a structural transformation? Number two, we do see that proportion of agricultural workforce has declined by more than 10 percentage points. And this decline in agricultural workforce are those who identified themselves as casual wage workers in agriculture, or are they also cultivators possessing marginal land? Also, what is the composition of other workers? Now, these two questions are partly answered when we see that there is a decline in both self-employed in agriculture and casual labor in agriculture. And this decline in agricultural workforce seems to have been exactly compensated by a rise in non-farm sector, particularly the regular wage category, in case of both male and female workforce in the village. And the regular wage work categories are also elaborated in a later slide. I'm also curious to know what is the distribution of the entire labor force in this village. The structural transformation story of this village gives us the impression that there is a smooth transition from farm to non-farm sector, although a low rate of returns non-farm sector. So are there no discouraged workers in this process of transformation within this village? The data shows a compensatory increase in non-farm work, but what is the share of unemployment? Has it increased, decreased, or negligible? I think a discussion on labor force is important if we have to draw implications about structural transformation of the village. The concluding and second part of this paper draws our attention to the non-farm sector, where we see that availability of regular wage work has risen, but other non-farm activities within the village are stunted. We also see an outward mobility among the castes in terms of movement for non-farm jobs in the younger age work group, from the villages to towns among SC families and towns to cities among the dominant caste families. Satheesha has also spoken about the captive non-farm market in the village. For example, the dominant caste households have a power dynamic as far as MG and RDA implementation is concerned. So there is clearly a captive market within the village. Now, some of the points that come out of this part of the discussion are also very interesting according to me. Number one, this part identifies some of the reasons for low non-farm diversification. For example, existence of attached labor, power dynamics of rich farmers, poor implementation of employment program. But concerning the power and influence of rich farmers, it would be appropriate also to interrogate how the nature of rich farmers have changed, particularly in terms of their incomes. Surely they are not deriving all their incomes from agriculture alone, like some may have dealerships in agri-input markets as well. Number two is the distribution of workforce by caste provides insights into the non-farm sector. Clearly, more and more SC families have gained employment, and so have the dominant castes. However, the dominant castes clearly have intergenerational gains and occupy more positions in the village economy. We also see that the village has made progresses in education. In terms of movement, the SC families seem to be trapped in a village economy, and the dominant castes have taken advantage of nearby towns, possibly through their social networks in 2009. And in 2019, we see they have moved from town life to city life, and SC families seem to have made some movement from village life to town life. And intuitively, such outward mobility can possibly be seen in the case of other caste groups as well. However, within this context, the scholar also points out that agriculture has definitive signs of stagnation, and the paper concludes by saying that there is a decline in agrarian prosperity, although the caste-based inequalities persist. Some of the issues that I think can be studied further with the existing data is, one, how has agriculture among the dominant caste changed, particularly in terms of the tenancy market? Second, to what use is land being put to? For example, in the sense that, is there any progress in industrial agriculture, say contract farming? What is the dynamic among the other caste groups? What implications can we draw from this village study about the current stage of structural transformation we are discussing in the context of India? It will also be interesting to know how decline in agricultural prosperity is experienced differently by different caste-based farming groups. In a scenario where many households are holding on to agriculture due to historical gains, as the paper claims, and the fact that there is outward and possibly upward mobility to town and city life, will it not then be ideal to categorize workforce by a more heterogeneous grouping, say combined presence in agriculture and non-agricultural work, and not such homogenizing and smooth categorization such as agriculture, non-agriculture, and so on? Because we do have evidence-based research that indicate difficulties of identifying workers as belonging either to agriculture or non-agriculture sector, but more tied to miscellaneous activities. I think this site of inquiry allows us to draw such complex categorizations. So finally, I congratulate the young scholar for being able to unravel some of the complex changes taking place in the rural economy and linking them to the more complex issues of structural transformation in India. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rajshree, for those very detailed comments. I got 7 sets of questions, 7 kinds of questions for Satheesha. Would you like to respond? And in which case, would you like to unmute yourself and respond to the discussants' comments? And then there are loads of questions in the chat. This is going to be very generative. Over to you.
Thank you for
Satheesha?
comments. To us about, am I audible?
Yeah, yes.
A bit, yes, a little bit broken up, but I think audible.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rajshree, for the detailed comments. So, first one was about the transaction. So, actually, the rich farmers, they're buying more land in the nearby villages and they're putting for sugarcane cultivation. As such, I did not find anyone sold the land because it's all irrigated land and they value land a lot. So, and also between 2009 and 19, especially for Vakaliga, there has been a rise in average point. So even this marginal still.
We're sorry, Satheesha. There's been a little problem with your internet. Is it possible that?
Could you go back over your answer?
Yeah.
Because for the last 30 seconds, I don't think we heard.
Okay. Shall I turn off my video? Then it will be more clear, I think. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. So second, about the entire distribution of working age.
No, Satheesha, sorry, if you could repeat your answer because your voice was breaking.
Okay.
Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, the first question was about the land transaction. So what I found between 2009 and 19, the rich farmers bought a lot of land outside the village and they put into cultivation for sugarcane. So I haven't found anyone sold the land because they value land a lot because it's all very fertile and irrigated land. And between 2009 and 19, even average holding by the Vakaliga also increased. Even though it's marginal from 2.9 acres to 3.2 acres. Second, about the working distribution of entire population. So between 2009 and 19, there's a large increase in the share of students. And for both male and female, and also women attending domestic duties. It also increased. It's around 43% of the total population, which is equivalent to the state average. So that's it's about distribution of population. Then, yeah, nature of rich farmers' income. So between this 2009 and 19, they highly diversified their income sources, rich farmers. So around more than 80% of the total income comes from non-farm assets, not from the cultivation. So they earn huge rental income. One farmer reported that on an average he earns 1 lakh rupees per month through rental income. And also they own townships, shopping malls, cinema hall, rice mills, and they also engage in finance. So a lot of income coming through business and trade. And about tenancy, actually only 10% of the operation holding was under tenancy in Alabujanahalli in 2009, and it has declined over time. And I think, yeah, I will look into other comments like decline in agriculture prosperity, how it varied across different castes, and classification of agriculture and non-agriculture. Actually, I looked at the multiple occupations. So we can't neatly classify into the employment categories. So we can clearly see between 2009 and 19, there has been decline in the multiple occupation, because one would expect when the diversification happens, the secondary occupation might decline. But within the cultivation or the cultivators, there has been significant rise in the secondary occupation, especially for female. So if I remember in 2009, around 50% of the female cultivators, they engage in secondary activity like sericulture, animal husbandry, and it is increased to 90% by 2019. So it's there. Yeah, I hope I answered the.
Thank you. Let's go to the questions in the chat. And then maybe I'll add some questions at the end. What I'm going to do is divide the questions between those people who ask questions about the village and those people who ask questions about the non-farm economy and outside the village. So Vijayamba asked about agricultural labor and whether there's a gendered aversion to agricultural labor, right? Anshuman asked about multitasking, by which I think they meant seasonal changes in work and labor. Okay. And Shilajit asked about the role of the debt bonding. You had one very dramatic case, but I think the question was a broader one, whether debt bonding, whether you have evidence, whether debt bonding can actually prevent people from migrating out of the village. So would you like to respond to those three questions about work in the village? And then I'll ask some more bunched questions from the chat about the non-farm economy.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a clearly gender division is in agriculture labor. We have seen that around 1/3 of the female workforce employed as agricultural labor, whereas the corresponding figure for male is just 10 or 15%, just half. So it's there. And second one was about?
It was about multitasking, the idea of multitasking.
Yeah.
And it's not that we juggle things during the day, but it's that over the year, a labourer may do many different kinds of jobs. So the question is that relevant, that concept?
Yeah, multitasking means the people engage more than one activity, right?
Not necessarily at the same time. In the question, it suggested over the year or over the season. Oh dear.
So what I understood, so much seasonality in agriculture. So what I understood, there is so much seasonality in agriculture in Alabujanahalli because they grow annual crop of sugarcane. So, and similarly paddy and ragi, this all require high labor. I think throughout the year, the demand for labor is quite high. But the farmers report that there is a high labor shortage, but this all high labor intensive tasks are done by the migrant laborers, basically mainly from the dry regions of Karnataka. And also labor intensive operations in paddy, all done by the female workers from nearby village. So I don't find any as such seasonal variations. But as I mentioned, there's a significant increase in the multiple occupation, particularly among the women between these 2009 and 2019, especially who engaged in cultivation. Especially the share of women engaged in sericulture and animal husbandry. This share has gone up between these two surveys. And the third one is debt bondage.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm not sure about that, whether this debt bondage can prevent the worker from going out of village. But in another case of attached labor, what I found, the worker is staying in this rich farmer's land, and in his home, he owned the house. So in return, he doesn't. What he does, he has to be there whenever the farmers call. So both husband and wife. Husband mostly work in the farmer's land, whereas the wife works in their household. So this kind of, I think this also reduces, I think, the diversification chances.
Thank you for that. That's very interesting. So I think you've more or less answered Dharmender's question at the bottom, that about whether migration itself has a role in structural change. But there are 3 questions, I think, 2 or 3 questions about the non-farm economy. And particularly Gaurav has asked about class. And I think you start, your presentation is very rich and you focus on class, but he's asking about caste and the non-farm economy, particularly land ownership, which other people have asked about as a driver of structural change. And Suresh asks a little more information about the growth of the scheduled caste involvement in the non-farm economy, as opposed to the Vokalingas, and the segmentation of services that are a big absorber of labor in the non-farm economy. Is that caste stratified? Are the kinds of service occupations that are developing in the non-farm economy with links to that village, are they caste stratified, and can you tell us about them?
No, I haven't looked at on different land class or anything. I think, yeah, that's a very useful. I think I should look at that, how this employment, non-farm employment distribution across different classes varies. That can give useful information. Yeah, thanks for, yeah.
Satheesha, sorry for interjecting. It is better you keep your video off because while responding, because that way you are more clear. You're clearer. Yeah.
Yes, just occasionally it freezes. So, do you have data to help us understand the caste segmentation of services? There was this question from Suresh. I think it was Suresh in the chat.
Sorry, class, I didn't get that.
Caste segmentation of services.
You mean traditional occupation? Like
the services, let me just try and find the question so I can read it out.
Can I interrupt, ma?
Please.
Yeah.
Oh, Suresh, please ask your question.
Yes, ma'am. So actually, I'm asking, like, see, because we have seen that service sector has increased. Like in the services you have mentioned shopkeepers, all those things. So, but in the case of ST, like SCs, so if your shop owner is an SC, no one, like the non-SCs won't come for the shop, or even for other services. You have said some other services like security or those things is fine, but the shopkeeper or so there the caste is very much important. Like if the SC owned a shop, only SC people will go to that. So since I'm also coming from a village background, so I just have a thought, like where you have studied also, is it the same scenario or the different in that way?
Actually, I don't know, but I have a lot of traditional caste-based occupations are there in the village. Like there are caste groups called barber, so they mainly do the hair cutting jobs. Similarly, there are a group called Madiwala, so they mainly engaged in the shinks. So there are a lot of traditional caste-based occupations I found, but within the service caste segmentation, actually, I think I will look into that. Is any such?
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Shatab has asked about casual labor in the non-farm economy. It's the mirror image of the fact that there are regular salaries in the non-farm economy, which is not what we always expect. So I would like to add to Shatab's question. Can you tell us what the regular jobs are that people in the village actually do, and the role of casual labor, which is his question?
Okay. So yeah, so I found 1 or 2 persons engaged in construction in the nearby village. on an average, they earn 400 to 500 rupees per day. But nobody prefer that job. I don't know why, because even though the wage rates are very low in agriculture, it's only 250 for men. Still, they are more attached to, particularly they own some land. So they do cultivation for self-consumption, like paddy and ragi, they mainly grow for self-consumption. Alongside, they work in others' farm. So that's the reason why they are not much into construction works. And there are a lot of constructions happening within the village that I found during the survey. And it's mostly migrant laborers who does these jobs, not the people from the village.
I think the story of migration in is something that you didn't really mention in your presentation, but actually probably is quite important. Deepa asks a question which may be related to that, whether there is any class organization, any laboring class organization, working class organization in the village. She says, apologies for a random question, but actually it's all converging around the circulation of labor in and out of the village.
No, I haven't found any that such organization within the village, but there are in other villages. When I was talking to the village mate of Mandra, he said there are a lot of, it's called Grakus. So working class organization is there. So they collectively mobilize and demand for higher wages, etc. But a lot of protests also they have carried out in Mandya. But in there was, I think long back, but later it's dissolved. So there is no such, I think, working class groups within the village.
Thank you. Judith from Oxford is thinking about why people don't leave agriculture, why the exodus is more marked. I mean, in fact, you're explaining how well-developed and attractive agriculture is, but she has a different take on it and is asking you whether different deterrent forces are at work in the non-farm economy, things like risk and insecurity and low income. So people may have jobs in the non-farm economy, but they're not very attractive, even if they're regular. She asks you whether insecurity and deterrent forces in the non-farm economy constrain the exit from agriculture in your village.
Yeah.
How would you answer that?
Yeah, so I specifically asked these questions, particularly the middle-aged farmers. You have all the options to move out. Bangalore is near. Why did not? He said, we have fertile land, we have better market access to our produce, we get fair price, and we can earn more what we could have earned in the city. That's the answer they give. Then, I also visited the village after COVID. So what I found, a lot of people who are working in Bangalore returned to the village. So they almost 1 year they were in the village. Once the lockdown shifted, they moved back. Interestingly, they got to the same job, but almost for 1 year they out of job. But the workforce rate did not decline because once they came back to home, everyone owns land. They were helping in the farm. So yeah, it's right. Whenever there's external shock, this non-farm employment will be most affected. So agriculture kind of providing a security against. Yeah.
That's really interesting. So you're saying that COVID can be regarded as an extreme insecurity associated with the non-farm economy, but that they could go back to their jobs afterwards, after this episode of tremendous insecurity and lack of income. That's very interesting. Are there more questions? Does anybody want to put their hand up and ask questions? Okay. In which case, may I just my own comments to finish it off, and then you could maybe ask or respond to them selectively. What I'm going to do is summarize the findings and then maybe ask some more detailed questions arising from my summary, if I've got it right. What you have explained to us through the village study is that caste is etched into the diversification and the reconfigured spatial relations of the non-farm economy, and that the result is a widening in assets inequality, and some of the questions have concerned class. What we see is that the elites, presumably capitalist class, are migrating and diversifying furthest and most extensively. So that would it be right to say that agrarian class is perpetuated over new spatial scales, both in agriculture? You have cases of people buying land in other villages and also in the non-farm economy. Is that in fact the class interpretation of what you have described in terms of caste and assets? And so if that's true, then there's a question about middle classes. Now, middle classes are not regarded in classical political economy as a correct term. We have capital and we have labor. But if we look at Marx's Capital, he does make considerable concessions that there are middle classes everywhere. So the question is, are there middle classes in your village? What do I mean? I mean ancillary or professional, Marx used those words, skilled labor, commuting to skilled jobs. It sounds as though the regular salaries are middle class occupations, and managerial classes, which consume the social surplus but are necessary for capitalist societies to reproduce. So the question is, are there middle classes? Are they confined to urban nodes? Or does your village study suggest that they spill out into agrarian settlements? And is this skilled managerial professional work, the regular salaries, is it labor, or what else is it if it's not labor? And of course, your response will depend on how you can weight different income streams and whether you could get that data from your fieldwork, as well as different definitions of what the middle class is constituted through. But this question is not going to go away as economies become more complex and the non-farm economy diversifies further. There's a question I have about intersectionality. Your tools of analysis are incomes and caste and then jobs kind of work. And what we tend to find in studies of development is that institutions are taken by themselves, such as gender, enormous amount of work on gender and class. And here, the institution that you pore over in most detail is caste. But the real world is messy because institutions intersect. So you'll have in the village, I'm quite sure, kinship, caste, class, gender, and maybe even religion. And I only say this, it's not a critical comment of your work. It's just something that the foundation might factor in the design of future research. And attached to that is a question I have about which I've been mulling over for decades and decades, which is, can we actually answer a very big question like diversification through the study of a single village? I think what your research shows is that what we can really study is processes and counterintuitive processes which are different from the ones suggested in wider surveys. But I mean, the crude question to you is, what on earth can you say about rural diversification and the much, much wider and more complex economy from a single village? How do you justify a single village? And the other general reaction that I have is that we know that structural change and agrarian transformation is conflictual. And I wonder, in your village revisit, you noticed, clearly you didn't focus on politics, but did you notice evidence on the politics of the different streams of exit from the village and entry into the non-farm economy? And Deepa has asked about trade unions, but I would add to that, are there forms of associational life that govern the politics of the development of the non-farm economy? Now, I have loads more questions, but I don't want to take up more time.
Right. Thanks for the comments and questions. So, one important thing I found the village is, about the kinship and all. So one particular family account own almost 40% of the land. So now they divided, but actually this same family clan owns around 40 to 45% of the total land, and they are joint family. That's how they keep the, I think, dominance in the village. And the family has highly diversified sources of income. So I was talking about this particular family. They own shopping malls, cinema halls, convention center. All they have a very wide non-farm asset base. Only one family clan. You are right. And yeah, the evidence from single village can't be generalized at national level. That I agree, but still it can give some insights.
Yes.
Into how the structural transform is taking place in different parts of the country on a small village. Then politics. There is no working class groups or union in the village, but during my survey, I found this village belonged to a panchayat called Annur, and there are 4 panchayat members from the represents this particular village, and four of them are from Wakaliga caste. None of them, So that's why they able to successfully lobbying the GP and stop the works, Manrega works in the village. And these are the families you can see high. They are the one who ended up in high professional job.
Right.
So they hold the younger generation has, some of them has PhD. They're working as assistant professor in Bangalore. So have very high mobility even in non-farm sector.
So they're both middle class and capitalist class. Judith has asked a supplementary, which responds to the discussion that we've been having. Not only in discussion is it evident that you've got people migrating in as well as people migrating out, but Judith reminds us that migration is not a single process. It's not that you migrate. There is seasonal work and there is commuting, daily commuting. And can you say anything about the incidence of commuting from the village? And maybe it's class segmentation and stratification as well.
Yeah, as I mentioned, mostly the SC workers, they commute to the nearby towns and they come back to the village by evening. So whereas Wakaligas, they mainly, most of them located mainly in Bangalore. So majority of them are working in multinational companies, but still they closely attached to the family, because it's not that the entire household is migrating out of the village. So every week or 3 times in a month, they visit village. So they closely attached the village. And many of the SCs within the nearby towns are running mobile shops, all these small types of shops and all, not like working in some professional jobs. And this is true for not only for SC. So within Wakaliga belong to backward class. Within that, there are a lot of other marginalized castes come, like Madiwala or Tigala. This all, they also have the same story. Then there is not much economic mobility for them. They are also working in the nearby towns. And also I talked about the immigration, especially into the sugarcane harvest. They are 90% of them belong to a caste group called Lambanis, belong to SC. So every year they come to the village around June, July, when the sugarcane harvest has. Then they go back in March. So April, May, June is a kind of slack season in the village, only 2 months. During that time, some Manrega work offered. Yeah.
Thank you for that very rich response. So the Q&A is actually pulling you to make more of the fact that there's a flux of people in and out of the village with different objectives and different castes, different activities, and that this is part of the structural transformation. One response to your big family, I remember in Ashok Rudra's book called Indian Agricultural Economics, which was published in 1990, which is probably before many of the audience were born. He made the point that in societies where the local economy, and he was talking about economy rather than social life, is dominated by very, very few entities, random sampling is no good. Because if you miss them out, you actually miss the entire story of the village. So he was saying, and this has implications for how we study villages and particularly how you study small towns, that you need to know whether local society or local economy is dominated. And if it is, you need to go and search out those households so that it's not a sample, it's a population of the wealthiest people, because they control so many of the markets and of the social relations of the village. And so that piece of information that you told us towards the end is extraordinarily interesting, again, for the design of research. And I'm very sure that FAS knows this and factors it into village studies, but I thought I'd mention it for a wider audience. Okay, are there any more questions? I think not. Well, I personally want to thank Rajshree for very detailed discussant's comments, and Satheesha for an extraordinarily interesting presentation and for parrying a lot of very varied questions from the chat. Thank you very much. Now back to, is it Sandeepan in FAS who's going to wind up?
I'll do the.
Sorry.
Yeah. With your permission, Professor Barbara, I shall take a couple of minutes to propose vote of thanks. First of all, I would like to extend my thanks to Satheesha for his insightful presentation and Professor Rajshree for her participation and comments. We're especially grateful to you, Professor Barbara Harris-White, for chairing the session amidst hectic travel and a very busy schedule. I thank Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung South Asia for their generous support in making this series possible. Thank all the attendees for participating and making this a very lively discussion. I am also thankful to the online team at FAS, Sandeepan, Tapas, Deepak, Setu, and Rakesh for their role in conducting this program very smoothly. Owing to unforeseen circumstances, there will be some changes to the planned schedule of the seminar series in the future. We'll be sharing the details pertaining to that on our website and social media handles in the coming days. Our website is fas.org.in, and you can find us at FAS Agri Studies on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. I request that you follow our website and social media handles to not only get updates about the seminar series, but also about the other work we do. A recording of the previous.
So Jim, sorry, very sorry to I just can't help interjecting one thing, because today's discussion and the importance of caste in the agrarian structure of the village that Satheesha presented inspires me to invite you all to have a look at the most recent article in the RAS, which has just been uploaded, which is the lecture by Professor Irfan Habib on caste and agrarian relations in pre-modern India. It is appropriate, in the context. So yeah, sorry for this interjection.
Thank you, Sandeepan, for that addition. So you can follow us. And a recording of the previous session that featured Dr. Kranti Nanduri is available on YouTube. You can take a look at that as well. She spoke about the patterns of accumulation and differentiation in the non-agrarian informal sector in India. This session too will be made available on YouTube in the near future. Any questions that could not be answered during the session or could not be asked due to lack of time or some reason, if you share them with us, we'll share them with the presenter and we shall get back to you with the answers. We'll be ending the session with this. Once again, thank you very much for staying through till the end. Have a good evening.